Island. I am very honored to be able to welcome Mark Baillie over in the UK right now. Mark Baillie is writing his PhD on counterinsurgency at King's College War Studies Department. Now that's in London, of course. Now back in 2000, before the 2005 London underground bombings, he had actually written a paper on British jihadis 6 months prior that actually pointed to this the New World Order, if you will. He runs seminars on a wide range of security matters at King's and the UK Joint Staff College. He's lived and worked in more than 14 countries in the fields of news, security, finance, economics, business, and politics, and appears widely in international news media on terrorism and international security. So got him to Skype in today. Mark, thank you for coming on the show.
Glad to be here.
Well, wanted to pick your brain. You came to us through one of our regulars, Bob Whitcomb, who, as we know, has lived and reported internationally when the events at Manchester happened. And we talked with Bob and we said, who do we go to in England to talk about what's taking place over there? He said, you have to talk with Mark. I know you've been doing media since that event. And it's kind of an overarching question as sort of, what's been happening in England since then, and obviously England is no stranger to terrorist events. So let's just start with Manchester and what's been taking place since then.
Okay, well, so far there have been every day a wave of arrests, about 20 or so arrested, 11 still in custody, but the police said just today that they think he was acting alone. Now, the fact that he had a fairly well-prepared bomb indicated to a lot of people that there must be a group or conspiracy, whereas in fact anyone with a certain amount of application can make these things at home, and a young guy with mental difficulties was recently convicted of doing exactly that, and he did it in his mother's house without her noticing. So unfortunately, any lone actor can make a powerful bomb.
And what you talk again about the arrest and sort of the follow-up to the event, what's the public's reaction to that? Are they fine? Again, is it better to bring folks in, or is there sort of some pushback as to, well, these folks weren't actually associated with this in the first place? What's the public's reaction been to the arrests and sort of the environment following the event at Manchester?
Well, genuine public reaction is very difficult to gauge because one only has measures like social media and news reporting, which are very selective. But the people carry on in any country. People are always talking about the British stiff upper lip, but I didn't see any panic in Nice, Berlin, Paris, and so on. People carry on. As for we're in the middle of a general election, and all the politicians are talking about the importance of there being no religious or cultural backlash. That's the same message that comes up every time. On the other hand, we do have a very large problem here. We have far more active jihadi extremists in Britain, most of whom were born in Britain, than we had IRA fighters during the 30 years of terrorism from the IRA in the 70s to 90s. So the sheer volume is much greater. And we're talking about the security services estimate 3,000 people, as it were, ready to go. About 400 have been to fight with ISIS in Syria. And they are within a group of about 20,000 keen supporters, and those supporters are probably the most important part of any terrorist or insurgency campaign.
And how does the British police begin to identify these actors? Of course, you just talked numbers of who they've identified, but an instance like this where there's speculation that it was a lone operative, how does the police or any security forces anticipate or deal with that if that person may or may not even be on their radar screen?
That is a very good question, and the most important question of all. There are, very broadly speaking, two methods. One is classic intelligence gathering, which is human intelligence, which is finding people within or close to groups who can report on groups or perhaps even penetrate them, but they have to be part of that general society to do so. And the other, of course, which is the advantage of social media, the disadvantage of social media is anyone can connect to an Al-Qaeda manual and to ISIS instructions on how to make bombs and where to do the attacks and how to do the attacks. The advantage is that electronic interception and monitoring of social media makes it likely that one can identify people in certain groups. And even when they're so-called lone actors, and lone wolf is often used, but it's the wrong word because the wolf is a loner, even when they are lone actors, they have nonetheless had at least social media contact and sometimes email instructions or social media instructions from people far away. So at some point there has been contact, physical or electronic, with before Al-Qaeda or now ISIS.
Do you think the public, Mark, has a good perception, whether, getting news reports from the police itself, of potential terrorist attacks that were foiled by the intelligence of the police and safety communities? Let's talk a little bit about that. What have you seen over in England, whether from news reports or just your general knowledge in the arena? How much has actually been thwarted, would you say?
A very large number of very plausible plots with equipment or explosives have been discovered, including one that was scheduled for the 10-year anniversary of the 2005 London Underground attacks, and a far greater number of conspiracies of at least talking, planning, getting the right manuals, and preparing to be at least able to carry out a terrorist attack. So it is a very large number. But the simple fact is that there will always be numerous cases, like the Manchester attack and like the Westminster attack only a few weeks ago, where the person is either completely unknown or in those cases had been noted, but hadn't been noted for anything particularly worrying. And there's an absolute limit onto how many people can be monitored at any given time. And that limit is in the area of 20,000, which is an absolute maximum, but you really can't follow that many people, keep track of that many people. I mean, not follow in the physical sense, but just in any way keep on the radar that number of people.
And talk a little bit, let's go back to 2005, as you mentioned. Again, your bio had mentioned the work that you had done on that paper prior to the 2005 London Underground bombings, on British jihadis. So what had you seen leading up to that, based on your studies and your work? How were you able to sort of eerily know that something could be coming along these lines?
Because it was blatantly obvious. My thesis wasn't that I'd discovered something extraordinary. My thesis was that there's a vast amount of evidence staring us in the face, and why are we not doing anything about it? And the symptoms became visible probably starting with the Satanic Verses protests in 88, 89, where you will remember that this book, The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, was burnt and bookshops were bombed and set on fire around the world, including in Britain. And this was the first symptom that there was a Islamist, that is to say, with a political agenda, whether violent or not, as opposed to the vast majority of utterly peaceful and integrated Muslims in Britain, but an Islamist agenda. And that became more international and got a lot of backing, particularly from Saudi Arabia. And this grew, and then we get 2001, we get Al-Qaeda, we get the great number of European residents who went to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, coming back and forming a hard core. And it was just a gradual development.
And what now, following Manchester, again, as we've seen terrorist incidents in England? We talked a little bit here. We actually had the former U.S. Attorney for Rhode Island in the studio with us to talk about preparedness measures, security measures. And one of the things that we discussed was obviously the attack that had happened at Manchester. sort of where is the perimeter? Are we in a new world order where there is no perimeter, in which even with the best of intentions of security, anything could still happen at any given time?
That's another extremely important question. The perimeter has indeed disappeared. It arguably disappeared completely in 2001, except it's got worse. 2001 and a great number of other attacks were highly prepared, highly complicated, and highly symbolic. What we are moving towards now, and this is long overdue, I mentioned it in 2005, but it's only starting to show up in the last year or so, which is what I call the terrorism of the mundane. That is to say, it's not hijackers of spectacular aircraft hitting spectacular skyscrapers or spectacular bombs. The car attack in Westminster was an illustration of this, like a rubbish lorry attack in Nice. Anyone can use anything, anytime, to attack anyone. The mundane is everywhere. And in a sense, I feel this is more subversive, more frightening than the spectacular attacks. And it is also almost impossible to detect, because if there's no proper preparation, no gang, no frequent correspondence with ISIS or other Islamist organizations, it's impossible to detect. And I think this is a more insidious fear, this terrorism of the mundane.
And you are
the perimeters disappear, as you say.
Yes, the lack of perimeters. Do you see a chilling effect on folks in England, again, having witnessed terrorist attacks? There was just a high U.S. official that said if anyone knew what he knew, no one would actually go out. Do you think this is going to alter behavior, or as you said, the lack of perimeter makes even altering behavior somewhat impossible?
It's very difficult to say. Behavior in Britain, of course, we had, as I said before, 30 years of the IRA, and it segued almost seamlessly into the Al-Qaeda period and now ISIS. And Manchester, in fact, had its last IRA bomb in 1995, and Britain its last IRA bomb in 2001, just a couple of months before September 2001. So Brits, well, anybody will get used to anything, and they change their habits a bit. We have high security in offices and government buildings. At one point during the IRA campaign, all post boxes were closed in London, all rubbish bins were removed, and people just put up with it. And they will put up with a gradual increase in repressive measures. In fact, we have huge legislation now that allows the checking on all sorts of private things, particularly electronic communication. And people gradually put up with a gradual growth of anything.
A couple of last questions I want to ask you, Mark, as I have you via Skype over here from across the pond. Talk to us a little bit about your work that you're working on with your PhD. What can we expect from you once that is completed?
Well, that concentrates specifically on the role of government policy in counterinsurgency, but the same applies to terrorism. Is that however good the actors on the ground are, the soldiers and administrators, or police and administrators and other government officials, however good they are, they need the full backing of a clear and explicit government policy. Above all, they need the money, and that can only come from government, but they need to know exactly what they're doing, where they're going, and what they're aiming for. Terrorism policy in this country is reasonable, but principally reactive. And some of the attempts to deal with the underlying problem are well-meaning but not very effective. We always hear in any country about anti-radicalization programs or counter-radicalization, and everyone talks about this quite naturally, but I'm beginning to find, and I was asking people at a conference about this recently, that it's rather like unicorns. Anyone can describe a unicorn, everyone knows what unicorns are, but no one's ever actually seen one. And I can't find evidence of a functioning, effective counter-radicalization program anywhere. The Saudi one is often spoken of, but that's effectively a highly structured house arrest in, of course, a very repressive country.
Indeed. And I just want to, as we wrap up here, Mark, maybe turn the focus over to the U.S. from, again, the British perspective. When we were chatting before you came on Skype, you mentioned that President Trump had said something recently that you said made a good deal of sense. And so I'd like to just maybe talk about how you think President Trump has been handling what's been taking place, not since just being in office, but just since the last couple of weeks since Manchester.
Well, that was one particular phrase in particular, which I'll come to, but the question really addresses the whole question of the publicity. Effectively, we, the victims, the governments, so on, actually provide the glory and the publicity that the attackers are seeking. Mm-hmm. And the media is always accused by everybody, everywhere, not just in America, of being the culprit. It's the media's fault. The media is reporting, first of all, on the day what happened, and then subsequently, for many days, everybody's reactions. That is not only legitimate news, it's necessary. So if politicians and other officials keep on going on about it, it will constantly get mentioned, it will constantly be in the headlines, and it provides what these people need, the glory of publicity. The oxygen of publicity, Margaret Thatcher called it. Now, President Trump said just the other day, just after Manchester attacks, words along the line, I'm not going to call this guy a monster, because that's what he'd want. He's just a loser. Now, I've been advocating for some time that we have to alter the narrative to one of contempt and even a mockery of these cowardly losers, because, like he says, if you call them monsters and mass murderers and everything, that's precisely what they want. They wanted to kill lots of people at a immoral gathering of entertainment where music is played and women go unaccompanied and the dancer, the singer is semi-clothed. These are the things they're trying to attack. So the more you call them murderous, mass murderers, or whatever, the more you're glorifying what they do. So I liked his point about he's not a monster, he's just a loser.
Well, we're going to continue, obviously, to keep tabs on what's happening in England. Obviously, we're here in Providence. Hopefully, at some point, we can have the opportunity to talk more, Mark. But I appreciate, in light of what's happened in England, to get your time today and that you were able to Skype in. So wish you well, again, across the pond. And we will talk with you soon, Mark Baillie.
Thank you.
Thank you kindly, sir. Take